So there are at least two Republican senators, John Cornyn and Thom Tillis, are saying they won't confirm Todd Blanche, who Trump will keep on as acting AG anyway. And they say they're not the only ones concerned about it. So what's coming next? And what does Trump's refusal to back off on this fund signal for his final years in office? One that seems increasingly centered on a campaign to undermine faith in the next elections and to embolden the insurrectionists who tried to overthrow that last 2020 election that he lost. Joining us, senior politics reporter at HuffPost, Jennifer Bendry, senior writer at The Dispatch and MS Now contributor David Drucker, and New York Times congressional correspondent Michael Gold. So, Jen, to you first. The president is claiming that this fund, this anti-weaponization fund that January 6ers could benefit from, is dead. What is the reality here?
Just because the president says this fund is dead does not make it dead, period. Everybody knows that. The president just says things sometimes. That's not going to make it true. What this is really coming down to are there are two Republican senators in particular, John Cornyn and Thom Tillis, who are demanding that Todd Blanche put in writing on some kind of formal agreement that this fund is toast, that is gone, is not going to bring it up again, gone. It's a pretty minimal ask considering what is still being allowed to happen with the settlement fund. But on the slush fund settlement here, the slush fund we're talking about, all they're asking is for something in print from Todd Blanche. And based on talking to the senators myself, Todd Blanche is willing to do it, but Trump keeps stepping in and canceling their deals.
Yeah, either Trump himself or Senator Thom Tillis seems to be blaming a, quote, incompetent Trump advisor on this Justice Department fund. Michael, again, is it an incompetent Trump advisor? Is it the president himself? Who is it that is keeping this fund in place, and also the IRS immunity that the president would have if this deal stays in place?
Well, look, Senator Tillis often invokes a hypothetical advisor when he wants to shy away from directly criticizing the president. But what we saw at that Camp David cabinet meeting is Trump basically said, this was not Todd, this was me. It seems like he was very involved in this settlement negotiation, as he would be, given that he's the one who sued the IRS. And it seems like he's taking real responsibility for wanting the fund to be alive. I mean, he said so very explicitly. So I think Senators Cornyn and Tillis have been very clear that they think Todd Blanche is negotiating with them in good faith. But ultimately, as we've seen throughout this second term, the buck stops with the president, and he seems to be taking ownership of that.
He's taking a lot of ownership, posting repeatedly that, blaming senators for blocking this, defending this fund, talking about it publicly at that cabinet meeting. David, ultimately, is the president, worried at all, or is the White House concerned at all about the fact that he has Republican senators now pushing back? And those Republican senators say that they are not the only Republicans that are against this entire fund and immunity deal.
Yeah, Laura, this was one of those rare instances in this Congress where we saw widespread rejection among Republican senators and even Republicans in the House of Representatives having to do with this so-called anti-weaponization fund, which, don't forget, this whole scheme is supposed to cover the president and his family against, future legal action and things of that nature, audits and all of that. And it was one of those things where Republicans, all not quite en masse, but quite a few of them, not just the usual suspects, were really upset at this whole thing. And so I don't think you're going to see a lot of give on this. Cornyn and Tillis, two outgoing senators, are out front on this, but they're not alone on an island. They represent quite a few voices. And I think we should point out, one, it's just an example of how there's really no trust between a lot of Republicans in the Senate in particular and the White House. And it's a good example of the fact that the president may say that he's willing to do something, and then, you can't count on it, because the very next day he said, "What? That's a great idea. I haven't given up on it." And I think that's why the Blanche nomination is being held up, is because they realize they'll confirm him, and this plan could proceed, because ultimately it's up to the president.
I guess the question, though, Michael, is can't this plan proceed anyways, even if he's not confirmed? What's to stop them at all from moving forward with this? What's to stop Todd Blanche from doing the president's bidding, even if he just stays on as acting AG?
Yeah, one of the wrinkles here is that the Senate already confirmed Todd Blanche as Deputy Attorney General. And given that there is no Attorney General, he effectively has the power to be the top guy at the DOJ until there's a replacement. Technically, his nomination can only sort of stay in limbo. He can only be acting for 210 days, but there are ways around this. Trump could nominate somebody else, but leave Blanche in as acting. He could kind of keep renominating him. But it seems like he's here to stay. I think the question is, at what point does he or the administration decide to take a different tack? Because it does sort of undermine and undercut his authority to have him stay acting attorney general for an extended period of time. But Trump raised the prospect yesterday of leaving him there. I mean, he has an option to do that if the Senate decides not to move.
So this weaponization fund, the IRS immunity deal, the Todd Blanche nomination now, SAVE Act, are all things that lawmakers, specifically senators, are pushing back on. Jen, I used to be up there on the Hill covering these lawmakers with you. I'm a little bit skeptical when we often sometimes herald the death of President Trump's political influence or his grip on the party. But obviously, Republicans are pushing back on him in these very key ways. Susie Wiles, according to Politico, had to go up there just yesterday or to try to talk to lawmakers about what they're holding up when it comes to the president's agenda and the SAVE Act. Do you think that that the president's grip on the party is actually significantly weakened and that this is the start of some kind of shift?
I mean, for the moment, I think he's pissed them off enough. And it's getting closer and closer to the midterm elections where there are other factors now that are weighing on them more than their fear of the president. They're looking out for their own butts in November. If the things that Trump is pushing them to do, John Thune, the majority leader, is telling him we don't have the votes to do that. And if we put those things on the Senate floor without the votes, then we're going to make all of our Republican colleagues vote on something where Democrats could attach amendments to things that would make them take very politically uncomfortable votes. And that's a bad thing for November. So this is that time of the year when like policymaking and lawmaking collides with the ramping up of the elections. People's hair is getting, you've seen senators with their hair is newly dyed and they're getting their haircuts. They're trying to look really good because they're running for re-election. So what they're doing right now is the last stretch of actual sort of, get something done before we can fully detach from policymaking. And Trump's like, oh, do these 5 things that I want you to do and just do it. And John Thune is like, hey, we don't have the votes. And Trump is like, you suck. Maybe you'll get replaced. Do it. And that's where we are. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's like a playground bully just saying, go do those things, when everyone is like, well, those things aren't really going to work.
David, I mean, same question to you, because, look, the polling shows that Trump has low approval ratings across multiple polls. Quinnipiac, 32%, AP, 33%, CNN, 34%. The list goes on and on. A Fox News poll, he's at 39% approval rating. Is this the start of any kind of significant break from the president? Or is it, as Jen is saying, which is this push and pull, them not going to go along with these key parts of his agenda ahead of the midterms, but then maybe eventually they'll come back to him?
Yeah, look, I think Jen hit it about right. And you're never going to get me to predict that the party is breaking with Trump. And his relationship with Republican voters is still, pretty darn good, even though the numbers are lower than they were a year ago. And I think the way to understand this is there's a lot the president could get Republican senators to do if he gave them things to do that was in both of their interests, right? I mean, they're treading water approaching the midterm elections. They don't want to sink. And instead of throwing them life preservers in the form of economic legislation to deal with the affordability issues, economic growth, even national security, he's throwing them a bunch of bricks in the form of this SAVE Act, asking them to kill the filibuster, adopt this, anti-weaponization fund, and these things are going to sink them, and he'll still be around. And particularly because a lot of voters that will turn out for Trump, low propensity Republicans, may not turn out in the midterm elections because they have a habit of blaming congressional Republicans for things that Trump is doing. And don't forget, even a lot of the resistance we're seeing in the Senate, or at least the tip of the spear of this resistance, is because Republicans threw Republican senators overboard. These were incumbents. He could have supported them. They would have at least been the nominees, or he wouldn't have turned against them, even if they had lost primaries. And so they're kind of like, dude, you threw me out of the house. What do I need to do anything for you if it's something I don't believe in? And so the president kind of has a mess of his own making, and Republicans are looking ahead to their own survival, because survival always comes first in politics.